Welcome to Western Wisconsin Journal. I'm Bobby Pominville and I'm your reporter on the arts. And I think an important part of the arts is language arts. So today we are having an author. I've known Jean for quite a while. I want to welcome you, Jean, to the show today.
Thank you.
And Jean Krauss is going to tell us about her first book she wrote. But a little background. She was a junior high English teacher, and you know, I have to compliment you because this is well written, and I really enjoyed that part of it too. And she lives in Hudson with her cat, and she's got lots of grandchildren, so that's a really neat part. But her book today is called Reasonable Doubt. We'll be talking about it, what it's about. But before we get to the subject matter, I want to ask you, how did you decide to write this book?
You know, I woke up one morning and I don't want to say it was God talking to me, but I'd heard this voice, write a book.
Really? That's pretty strong.
Yeah.
So you did take that to heart, and you had a reason to write it too, didn't you?
Yes.
Because something had happened in your life that was really quite earth-shattering. Life-changing, you might say. But how did you find a group, or how did that work out?
One day at our Bible study at Bethel Lutheran Church,
Yeah.
two of us were talking in one group and two in another group, and we kind of each heard each other talking about, we should write a book. They were talking about it, we were talking about it. So I turned to the two other ladies and I said, are you talking about forming a group to write? And they said, yes. I said, well, we got a group right here. There's 4 of us here right now. So that's how we started.
How perfect. So then did you have like weekly get-togethers or something?
We started with, it was twice a month. We were meeting at the Hudson Bagel Shop for a while.
Oh, yes.
And one of the ladies also invited a gentleman to join us, so he was with us for about a year.
Really? So did he give some good feedback then?
He was excellent feedback. Because he was a photojournalist himself. He worked for Channel 11.
Really?
And he probably is well known to you, Bobby, Ethan Hart.
That sounds familiar. Yes,
Ethan,
I think
yeah,
maybe
Ethan
I
was,
do.
he was born and raised in Duluth, Minnesota. He is an only child. He had terrifically wonderful stories to tell himself. So, and he helped keep all of us kind of on target. Why are you writing these books? Was what his comment always was. Why are you writing? You know,
That had to really help to have someone like
really
that.
Did. Yeah.
And you know, I'm going to read a beautiful quote you included in your book, in the front of the book. And it kind of explains a little bit about a story, the story that you told. It's important that we share our experiences with other people. Your story will heal you, and your story will heal someone else. When you tell your story, you free yourself and give other people permission to acknowledge their own story. And I should give credit to Iyanla, you have to help me. Iyanla Van Zandt. I'm kind of using the long A sound. I don't know if that's right. But anyway, people might recognize the name, who knows. But that is so true. And I think it's almost therapeutic to write things down.
It was extremely. It was hard from the standpoint that I had to relive all of the hard, terrible, emotional things. But once that was out on paper, I could deal with it much better.
And it is a true story.
It is. It's based on my son's life.
That's right. So just to let people know, the title is Reasonable Doubt, Exposing the Miscarriage of Justice in the Wrongful Conviction of Paul Krauss. And that is your son.
Yes, it is.
And I think this is going to be very interesting because I think people will identify with your story. I know I did. So would you, let's start with part 1 then in the story.
All right.
You've got 2 parts, well organized. And the first part, this is kind of you talking. You say, Lord, you gave me a mountain. So could you tell us about that?
Well, the mountain was climbing up over this obstacle of the hardship that our whole family went through with what happened with Paul. And for a long time, I felt I was climbing that mountain alone. For reasons that are explained in the book, my husband was not real supportive because he was dealing with his own issues of illnesses. And so I was climbing that mountain alone. And then I moved to Hudson and met this group of ladies at the Bible study.
Yes.
And they encouraged me to be able to share that horrible story and without judging me on what was going on.
Right.
And from then on, I was able to really look at it and say, okay, what can I do? And that's when the book inspiration came.
Yes.
So.
And you'd been through quite an experience with that. Do you want to tell us what happened with in your son's life to make that huge change? And
Well, Paul was always, he was our middle child, and he was always sort of lived his own life. And no angel in this group at all, but he was basically a good person, but just had made some bad choices along the way in his life.
Right.
So that's what caught him into the problem that finally resulted in him being in prison for 24 years. So
Right, and that's an extremely long sentence.
it is much more than he really should have gotten because of the circumstances, but that was what they brought up with him. So he's been in 12 years now. He's got another 12 years to serve yet.
Oh, he's half done. Wouldn't there be any way to get out early, like they say?
In a
Maybe
few very rare cases, you can get early out, but not for the particular things that he was charged with.
Okay.
And in the state of Wisconsin, there is no more parole or anything like that. They don't do that. That law it's now, you serve whatever time they give you. There is no early out for good behavior, anything like that. It sounds like it should be, but it was disposed with long ago. So
Right. And I don't know if you want to share anything about those charges.
well, the charges.
Not that you have to,
Yeah.
but
Well, they're listed here, and the problem was that when the judge put down the sentence, he basically strung them together one after another,
right.
which is not usually the case. If there's several laws that have been violated in a single incident, usually they run concurrently, so your sentences run
Yes.
together.
Yes.
Where in this case, he put them one after the other. So there's one, you serve this one, then you serve this one, then you serve this one. And the longest one is always the first one you serve. So you're not making up any time. You serve that whole time, then you start serving the other time. So that's what made it especially difficult, because
Yes.
it's a very hopeless kind of case where you don't think, I'll never get out of this. And
Right.
there's no way to explain or describe what it's like for him to be in a situation like that, where he feels that he did not do the things, he's maintained that right along, he did not
Right.
do what he was accused of doing.
Right.
And to be convicted of that is just appalling. I mean, the book itself was written so I don't have to talk about try to explain it to people individually.
Right.
Because they say, what happened? Well, read the book, because the book tells it all.
Yes.
Tells exactly what happened.
Exactly. You've got it all documented here. And then you start to go into, you kind of explain what kind of child he was and how he was happily married, and then it deteriorated into this event that happened, and of course he was charged and ended up in jail. And during that period, you must have been really soul-searching, because there were so many things that happened at the trial. And things did not seem to be going legally the right way.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We went through 3 appointed attorneys, and
Right.
there were just so many other things in the background, and I don't want to make accusations, but there were a lot of things happening behind the scenes that we were not aware of, and we were naive enough to believe that the justice systems really work, and I'm sorry to say it doesn't really work.
Well, that's what we all like to
Yeah,
think.
Yeah.
But then you really experience some, can I use the word discrimination?
Yes.
And almost some bias there. So it was, and then it was really difficult to get past that, because in the trial, he was made out to be a certain type of person that did all these things. And there was a problem with the lawyer.
It wasn't just one lawyer, it was 3 different lawyers to begin with to even get him into the trial. And then we have the attorney who was on the other side, the district attorney,
Right.
who had his own agenda going, which I don't think I even touched on in the book, but there was an agenda for him going on at that time too. And he now is an assistant district attorney in another county in northern Wisconsin. It's just very hard to talk about it. and
Well,
to
yes,
explain
of
it.
course, and I know it's in the book, so people can always read it, but I just want to share a little bit of that. And I didn't know some of these things, like if you didn't do something in a certain time period, then you're penalized, and if the lawyer didn't prepare adequately, it really hurt your son more than anything.
Well, after everything was done and he was actually in prison, we did get an appellate attorney, and when he looked at what had been done, he said that lawyer that handled the actual trial case, he said, did not even do basic lawyer 101 is how he expressed it.
Yeah,
Didn't even follow the basic requirements of being a lawyer
right.
and defending a person. So, yeah.
So you did get to appeal somewhat, and did you get a new attorney then?
With a lot of money.
That's right.
Yeah.
It costs, doesn't
It
it?
ended up, we sold our home in order to get
To
money.
finance it.
Yeah.
And you know, I think most of us would do anything for our children, but you certainly have gone way overboard in what you did to support your son, and I think that's very commendable. But as far as the trials and all that, most of us don't have a lot of experience. I mean, I've been called to jury duty a couple times. But you know what's crazy nowadays? Everybody's watching these attorneys on TV. And you can't always say that it's like Judge Judy or whoever.
No.
It's totally different when it's something like that. And the other thing is, the people that were, you know, when you're sworn in to tell the truth, and then you have a witness that doesn't tell the truth. And then the other really important piece is evidence, don't you think?
Exactly, yeah.
And from what I read in your book, there were different accounts by the same people. I mean, the people in the same department had different accounts of what the evidence was and where it was found and what it looked like. And when you had 2, 3, 4 different opinions, I don't know how people can make a choice that way then.
Well, my contention always was that the trial attorney that he had, first of all, was not a well man. He had several issues that were keeping him from being his most efficient.
Yeah.
And then the judge was not allowing him to do any objecting anytime he brought up something that he objected to. I mean, I was sitting there in the audience listening to everything going on in that trial, and it was like, I could have done a better job. I mean, even if the jury is supposed to, if the judge says, just don't listen to that or don't use that as a, they've heard something. And once you've heard something, it's hard to forget it.
That's
And
right.
so there were a lot of things that the jury probably should have heard, even if the judge had said, no, we can't allow that.
Right.
I just didn't feel the jury was, or the attorney was doing a real good job.
Oh. And then what was the next step then?
Well, after the trial itself was over, then he was remanded to jail, and because we couldn't meet the bail that was set up, it was $100,000 cash. And when they say cash, they mean cash. We're not talking a check or anything like that. It's got to be cash.
Right.
And so once he was back in jail, then he sat there for several weeks, couple months in fact, and he was finally moved from one jail to another jail. So it was further for us to take the boys to see him.
Right.
And so then immediately after the trial had been over, it's customary for the attorney to actually put in a request for an appeal. It's just kind of anytime you
Yes.
get a guilty verdict, that's the way the rule kind of works.
Yeah.
And he had done that. So then now we had to figure out what to do for an appellate attorney. Again, we couldn't afford one at that time. So again, we had an appointed appellate attorney who came from down the Madison area. And the first time he met with Paul, I mean, he'd only seen Paul 10 minutes, and he always said, "You haven't got anything to appeal." And I mean, we couldn't believe that he would say something like that. He hadn't even looked at the case as far as we were concerned. So that's when we first got some money together and got an appellate attorney to look at the case, at least to talk to Paul and see what was going on. And when we met with him, he said he certainly has a lot to appeal. And a lot of them you've already kind of mentioned here.
Yes.
Evidence and some of the conflicting attorneys or conflicting comments that were made.
Yes. Yes.
Some of the officers and so forth telling different stories or whatever, interpreting things differently.
And it was pretty obvious things that were very important to the case,
And
from
one-
what I read. And so then, what happened then when you finally got that attorney?
Okay, when he let us know that he was willing to accept Paul's case for the appeals, so now we had to get more money, and that's when we had to sell the house.
Right.
I mean, because he was asking for a pretty good chunk of money that we didn't have access to that kind of money. We were retired and we were living comfortably, but we didn't have a lot of money floating around somewhere.
Exactly.
So that was when we did that, and so he took the case, and there were some shenanigans. I think that's the only thing I can talk about or call them, and they're described somewhat in the book where things were not done according to how they should have been by procedures.
Right.
Something called the Mockner hearing was never a Mockner hearing. And a Mockner hearing is supposed to put your attorney on the stand to tell how he prepared his case for you. And that never happened. And that was part of what we appealed, was that we had an attorney who was not doing his job.
Right.
And we never had a chance to put him on the stand and make him talk about how he prepared. So that was another big flaw in the whole situation. Well, once that appeal was turned down by the appellate court over in Eau Claire, we then took it to the state level. And again, it wasn't even looked at, because the day after we sent the appeal, we already had a letter dated coming back to us saying they wouldn't take it. Well, once you go past the state level and they've turned you down, the only next level is federal. And that costs a lot of more money, which again, we didn't have more money to use.
Right.
And then along with that is that only a small percentage of cases presented to the federal court ever even gets looked at.
Right.
It's like I don't know what the percentage, because I'm not good on numbers, but it's just a very small percentage that even make it to the
Sure.
court. So
Yeah.
so that was as much as we could do. The book is the next attempt.
Right, and really important, because if someone, I know there's some really ethical lawyers out there, and maybe someone would see it or volunteer their time, or I've heard about certain groups of, I think they're people that are studying law, that do it as part of their education, you might say?
You're thinking of the Innocence Project?
Yes,
And
I think I am.
they did come and talk to him at one point, spent about 5 hours talking with him, but it wasn't quite the type of case that they normally deal with. They like things that have DNA evidence or something where a person wasn't there at all. That you know,
Right.
Paul admits he was at the location, but what he does not admit to is, and he says he did not do what she said he did.
Yes. So
And,
it's kind of a he said, she said.
Exactly, and that's how it should have been treated. And normally, a case like that is never even brought to trial. They don't even bring
I
it to trial
see.
because it's
I
who's
didn't
going
know
to say?
that.
There's no other witnesses to say who said what.
Well, that's true.
Yeah.
They're the only ones there. So that's really interesting, Jean. And the way you've written it is, like I said, it's very commendable. It's well done. So should we talk about part 2 now?
Okay.
Have we missed anything? I don't
Well,
want.
if I could just read.
Yes, certainly.
Okay, here are the issues that I address in what I call Paul's key, which is the second half.
Right.
And it's explained as being Paul, the Apostle Paul, was a prisoner himself.
Yes.
And the symbol, the Christian symbol for him is a key. So the key gets you out. If you have the key, you can unlock it and get out. So the key could be a person who could help unlock those prison doors for my son. So in part 2, then, I talk about 4 issues that we feel are genuine basis for appealing and for reopening his case. And then I address each one of those, and I document them with things from court documents and statements that were made and so forth. So these are all part of his case file. So there's 4 things. One is a violation of his civil rights, ineffectual assistance of counsel, which is what I alluded to before with the attorney that was not prepared, arranged, falsified, misrepresented, and untested evidence. There was no DNA testing, there was no fingerprint testing, nothing like that was done. And finally, 4th point is false and contradictory statements by the accuser and by law enforcement officers. So those are the 4 bases for what we feel should be opening his case up, having somebody really, really look at it now, using this book perhaps as some guide. Because I've gone through, I've studied his case end to end for several years before I ever got to this point of writing a book about it.
Right, because this is technical.
Yes, it is.
And I have really not got a lot of experience in all of these type of things that can go wrong with a trial, although there's some of it I've heard of, but it seems like you've got so many points here to deal with. And that a person reading it would, read this and say, wow, this is definitely something that should be reopened. And if that could happen, that would be your dream, wouldn't it?
That's my goal.
That's your goal.
Yeah.
And even this, you've researched it so well, all the legalities and some of these things you're writing about that are definite points that should be considered. So, and then you've even got parts in here where Paul has written to you. You've included a letter. And I think that's really great to see too.
Well, the letter symbolizes many different letters that we together kind of wrote and sent out. I don't know how much postage I've spent just sending letters out to people like newspapers, TV, radio stations, things like that, to try to get somebody to look at this. Yes. Look at this and tell me I'm wrong, that there's no point here. And like you said, Bobby, there is any reasonable person that reads this could I think they'd come away thinking, what the heck happened?
Yeah, because there's parts in here that you even question as I'm not totally knowledgeable on the laws. But there are parts here that make me even wonder, how did this happen? And you would hope the justice system would be truthful and something we could admire. And then I imagine you have sent a lot of letters too.
Yes, I have.
And those 2 sons, you've tried really hard to keep them together and keep the family together and going to see them, but it's quite a ways away, I know that. So, yeah, I don't know how this is going to end, but I'm hoping there's going to be another chapter to this.
I would love to write another chapter.
That would be really wonderful if that could happen, and you could see some movement on this, because it seems right now it's at a blocked part. And I think most of the things you've written in here are really truthful. Well, you haven't really put any fiction in there.
There's no fiction. This is all true.
It's a true story, and it really happened, and it's tragic.
Yeah, it really is. And the sad thing is that too much of this goes on, not just with Paul, but so many people. And you hear more and more about people being exonerated because of things like this that happened to him.
Right.
Even one of the DOC officials, a man by the name of Ed Wall, has now written a book talking about things in the Wisconsin justice system.
Really?
Dealing with our present governor as well. So he just
wow.
came out with a book. His name is Ed Wall.
Oh, that's good to
And,
know.
in fact, I had some dealings with him on Paul's case, not on this particular stuff, but on a related issue that was going on with Paul.
Really?
And so I spoke with Ed and wrote back and forth with him a few times. So yeah, so he's no longer in the DOC, but he was in 2 different capacities. So that's how I happened to connect with him on one of those things. So
So do you happen to know the name of that book? Or something similar, but
it just came out. It's, oh gosh, I should have written it down.
well,
so-
just give us his name again.
His name is Ed Wall.
Ed Wall.
W-A-L-L.
And he's been in the justice system
He's-
in
yep.
Wisconsin.
As far as I know, he may still live in the Madison area. He's gone into a private position now, a different business. But he just wrote that book, and it's come out on public television in the Madison area. And he's been interviewed over radio and television, as far as I know, recently, very
That's
recently. In fact, just
interesting.
last weekend, I think, again. So it's well worth looking up Ed Wall and
Oh, yes,
his book.
thank you for that tip.
Yeah.
I appreciate it. And where could people get your book?
Well, I have some available directly to purchase, and otherwise from Amazon. Just look up Reasonable Doubt and then my name, Jean Krauss,
Right,
and purchase it that way.
okay. So have you done some, any signings or anything like that?
I have. I did one down at the library back in the spring it was,
Oh, yes.
and the problem is getting the publicity out to get people there.
Oh, yes, I know that.
So, and that's what this is supposed to hopefully help with.
Yes, hopefully this will open up some doors and some people will be interested.
And a lot of just word of mouth people, you know.
Right.
I don't miss a chance to talk about my book. There was a lady out here in the lobby that asked about what I was here for,
Yes.
and I told her, so she knows too. So
Interesting. Well, I hope you get some attention to it, and I do know that it's an interesting subject. It's well done the way you've written it, and I know you have a lot of personal angst into this book. But I just hope that people will, find it interesting and buy it. And paperbacks are really reasonable, so I think that's a good way to go nowadays.
can I just read this one part?
Yes,
Okay.
let's have you read.
Well, this is the introduction to chapter 21, which is in part 1, but it says, Elvis Presley recorded a song written by Marty Robbins, a country western singer-songwriter, called You Gave Me a Mountain. Some lines from the lyrics of that song are descriptive of what life has been like for Paul and for me since June 2nd, 2006. And here I quote, You know, Lord, I've been in a prison for something I never done, is one line in particular which applies to Paul. He has maintained since the first day that he did not do the things Melanie, his wife at that time, accused him of. And then the second paragraph, but this time, Lord, you gave me a mountain you know I may never climb. It isn't just a hill any longer. You gave me a mountain this time, end quote. How well that describes the overwhelming feeling that hit me that day and continues to cause me heartache and grief. In dealing with all the thousands of details and consequences resulting from the events of June 2006, it does seem that I have climbed hill after hill alone. The mountain is still ahead of me, but my faith has grown stronger over the years. I know now that God is climbing that mountain with me. That will be true until the day I see my son walk out of prison, a free man. I only hope that I'll live to see that day and that it happens soon.
Yes, that is so tragic that the timing is as you get older and, like you said, there's 12 more years to go and you don't know what it's going to bring. You have no idea.
I don't. And whether I'll even be around.
That's really well written. Thank you for reading that. Jean, thank you for coming today. I've enjoyed talking to you about your book. It's been in the works for several months since I learned about your writing, and I'm just delighted that we could talk about it today, and hopefully people would get out there and read it and buy it.
Well, I appreciate your interest in letting me have my say.
Well, you're certainly welcome.
Again, we've known each other for quite a long time.
Yes, we have.
We go back to some other things.
So I'll say thank you for watching today. I hope you learned some things from the interview. and could enlighten you in some ways about the justice system. So thank you for watching.